All right, here we go. So, all right, welcome to the last day of our symposium. And over the past day and a half, we've seen some really good examples of how visualization has been used to approach topics across the transportation industry, from highway performance to 3D design and goods movement. But one thing you've probably noticed is kind of the common theme running underneath visualization is storytelling. And this is something that Donna Wong mentioned yesterday morning during her opening session. So, good visualizations are not just pretty pictures or, pieces of art, but they really are tools that can be used to tell a compelling narrative. And so who better to help us learn about visualization as a narrative tool than three journalists who use visualization in their reporting every day. So we have Tim Meko on the end here. He's a graphics reporter from the Washington Post. Tim designs and develops maps, data visualizations, and explanatory graphics on a variety of topics, including transportation, climate, geopolitical issues, and the eclipse I just found out. There's one that just hit the...
Published this morning.
This morning, so check it out. That's very timely. Before coming to the Post, he led the visuals team at the Urban Institute and was an infographic artist at the Columbia Dispatch. So, Tim, we welcome. Meredith Broussard is an assistant professor at the Arthur L. Carter Journalist Institute that's a mouthful, at New York University, right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Her current research focuses on artificial intelligence and investigative reporting, with particular interest in using data analysis for social good. A former features editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer, she's also worked as a software developer at the AT&T Bell Labs and the MIT Media Lab. And her features and essays have appeared in the Atlantic, Harper's, Slate, the Washington Post, and other outlets. She holds a BA from Harvard University and a Master of Fine Arts from Columbia University. And finally, we have Lazaro Gamio, is an information designer living in Washington, D.C., currently working as the visuals editor at Axios. He was previously an assignment editor at the graphics department at the Washington Post, and before coming to the Post, he worked at his hometown paper, the Miami Herald. So welcome, Lazio. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll just start off with an opening question for the panel here. So how did you first encounter visualization and decide to make it part of your career as a reporter? So who would like to take that first?
I really started just in high school and college, photoshopping myself with pictures of Britney Spears. And eventually I started off doing a little bit of computer science and then realized, did a little computer science, realized that wasn't my jam, moved over to art, eventually went to grad school for design, and that design track pushed me into a journalism internship at the Columbus Dispatch in Ohio. And it was just very cool. I got to crawl on my stomach and go, explore caves with cavers, and then explain that to the world, by drawing and illustrating, and I actually did sculpture for some of my projects. So that's kind of how I got started. But it all really went back, if I traced my roots, back to having fun and screwing around with my friends, and sending Christmas cards to myself with Britney Spears.
Nice. Last, how about you?
So I actually went to college for industrial design. I really wanted to be a car designer, and then they told me that was really hard, and then I wanted to be a toy designer, and then that was also hard. And then I realized that industrial design was less cars and toys and more like vacuum cleaners and toothbrushes. So I was like, nah, I'm going to be an illustration major and just draw robots. And then I dropped out of school, went back to my hometown, Miami, and I just started all over again. And I did like community college and a 4-year degree, and then I got into my student newspaper, and that's how I was introduced to journalism. So it was like I could draw, I could design, I could do all this stuff, and it just seemed like the natural avenue to sort of work and see the world that way. And I stumbled into data visualization because I got hired at the Herald, and I wanted to make money and not die. So.
Sounds very practical.
Yeah, very practical.
All right.
Yeah.
So I have this eclectic background. I started my career as a computer scientist, and I quit to become a journalist. And I've ended up in visualization because it's a place where computer science and art meet, but also it's a really good mechanism for explaining things. And a lot of my work is explanatory journalism. I really care about helping people to understand complex topics using plain language, and visualization is a really great tool for doing that.
Thank you. So Tim, one of the, I'm going to put up one of your things here. So one of the projects that really caught my attention was the piece that you did for the Washington Post, 6 maps that show the anatomy of America's vast infrastructure. And this is online if you can find this. But can you talk a little bit about the process you used, kind of how you got the ideas and what the process you used to create this?
So I've been a fan of this type of thing, the bare bones, super simplistic style of visualization. That's Fathom Design, I believe they're in Seattle or Portland, created a map that did this for streets. This was several years ago, and they showed only streets in the in the United States, and basically that was it. Very minimalist. So we decided let's try to do this. Try to do it with other stuff. This was right after President Trump was elected, and there were these rumblings that he was going to be pushing for a major infrastructure plan. So we said, okay, people don't necessarily realize all the infrastructure that surrounds them. And what we ended up doing was leaning on open data for all of these maps, either from, in this case, this was Energy Information Agency. A lot of the bridges data, the electrical grid data actually came from OpenStreetMap. So there is a major caveat that these are people out there tagging electrical towers and things like that. But it's just some very simple command line based filtering of that massive data set. Same with these railroads. The thing with the railroads was that the data set originally came through with abandoned railroads. So you got to kind of see, and that that's a story in its own, right? But you got to see old America versus newer America. Obviously, our rail system needs improvement, but that was an interesting kind of wrinkle. And then this data actually did come from a website that specializes in flight tracking, and it's a week's worth of flights. The whole purpose of this project was just to illustrate and to demonstrate how much infrastructure is around us and where the hotspots are. This was data from marine vessels for 2013. Again, it's kind of stale data, but it's fair. It's 4 years ago. It's not too bad.
It's exposition. You're just showing.
All we're showing is where all the traffic goes. So the Great Lakes is interesting. You have some of these the barge traffic up the Mississippi and down the Ohio River is really interesting as well.
And some of these, if you go through the story, you can see there's different drill down maps that are underneath, kind of thing. So, yeah, this one I thought was interesting too. This is on the rail section, but rail freight tonnage, millions of tons per year. What's going on there in the middle of the country?
Yeah, so this actually is we talk a little bit about simplifying, right, and being very clear. This is from a DOT publication, and it had rail freight tonnage. It also had, I believe, inland waterway freight tonnage as well. But I was able to actually open it up. Whoever made it as a PDF, so I could isolate layers, which I'm very thankful for. And I was able to just isolate the rail. And what this is, this actually sparked another project that I did. But all that big swath in the middle of the country is a lot of it is coal coming out of the Powder River Basin of Wyoming. I grew up in a coal town in eastern Kentucky, and the rail industry there is huge and employs a very large share of the population. And so a lot of this gets shipped either by barge or by rail. A lot of it could also be agricultural as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right, Meredith, I'm going to switch over to your presentation here. I'd like you to talk a little bit about what your focus is and what you're interested in.
Well, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what is data journalism. Can you raise your hand if you feel like you're familiar with what is data journalism and you'd recognize it? Yeah? All right, you guys definitely better raise
I
your
hope
hands.
I do.
Okay, well, so the way I like to describe data journalism is that it's the practice of finding stories in numbers and using numbers to tell stories. And it is a fairly diffuse practice. It shows up in a lot of different kinds of artifacts. Generally, you have infographics, you have data visualizations, and you have news apps. And infographics and data visualizations, there's a lot of overlap. It's not really worth getting into the nitty-gritty of like how do you differentiate between the two. But I pulled up a couple of examples of data journalism. People who do data journalism, besides the fantastic publications represented here, include Bloomberg, ProPublica, 538, The Upshot, LA Times, and Vox. Lots of other publications. But if you read any of these organizations regularly, you'll run across some data journalism. So an infographic, what this is it's data sorted, arranged, and presented visually. So in our top image, we've got an undifferentiated mess, and then once we sort it and arrange it and do something with it, we have a graphic that is more meaningful for our audience. So we can discover that, oh, in this pile there are a lot of red Legos. And if the red Legos represent something, then we've provided a service to our readers to allow them to understand things better. Data visualization doesn't have to be complex. All right, so a really good way of starting out in data visualization is just to do the simplest possible thing, which is usually a line graph. Your plain old Excel graphic is a totally legitimate place to start and then get fancier. And data visualization is not new. Anybody seen this image before? Yeah, okay. And something I think is interesting is you see the way that that Menard's map of Napoleon's march from Paris to Moscow, you see the way the line gets thinner as it goes right? It reminds me exactly of the thing at the top of the coal chart. So there are these iconic ways of explaining information, of explaining data that we've really been depending on for a long time. And then another thing that is really helpful in journalism that you can take into planning graphics for transportation visualization is the idea of letting the reader put themselves into the story. So this is a project from DNA Info that answers the question, how tall will new buildings in my New York City neighborhood be? So DNA Info is a hyperlocal outlet. They just cover New York City. They cover all the boroughs. And what you can do here is you can put in your own neighborhood. So I live in Greenwich Village. I put in Greenwich Village, and it shows me what are the new buildings planned for my neighborhood, how tall are they going to be, and then I, as a reader, can project, all right, how do I feel about this? Because people care about light, they care about space, they care about construction interruption. So when you're designing graphics or designing interactive visualizations, one of the ways that you can deal with very complex data is by imagining, okay, what is the reader going to care about in this data, and how can I design something that allows the reader to find their own context in the data and kind of explore and figure out what does this mean for me? Okay, so let's just skip the rest and we'll go on to Les.
All right. Switch over here.
I have a lot of slides. I don't want to take
yeah.
up all the time.
Okay.
I speak quickly. So.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me? I guess you can.
So Les, as I'm getting your the presentation up here, so you work for Axios, which is a relatively new media company. I never actually really heard of you guys until
6 months old.
Okay, well that explains why then. So,
Yes.
but you talk about your company. I was reading about it. They value something called smart brevity. So can you talk a little bit about what that is and how visualization?
We write really short articles. That's the gist of it. We do this thing where we just scoop up everything on the internet and give it to you in like bullet points. The idea is that we serve people who like want to wake up in the morning and know what's going on in the world and then move on with their lives. We don't really do long form stuff. Everything has to be nice, short, and quick and punchy, which for me is like a huge challenge because I used to work with Tim, and like we have these like blockbuster, like long interactives where you can make like 100 maps and like just kind of have fun. Now I get like this much space, which is terrifying but also liberating and challenging. And this is kind of an interesting segue here. This is Gregor Eisch. He's a designer, I guess like a crazy guy at the New York Times. Yeah. And he says, a steadily growing part of our work is to create tiny animated versions of our graphics for the sole purpose of making you click. So the way we approach graphics at Axios is only make the tiny animated thing and don't make the big thing. So if you can go to the next slide. So this is an example of a chart we made that's an animated sort of like Meko weird box plot thing. One way that we sort of like sneak in more information into a tiny space is to animate everything. I yell at people if they don't animate stuff. Like it's just like why? Like give me more stuff. Like give people a treat. So the way that a lot of our graphics work is that they're fully interactive. Well, in this case, it just has like go left and right. But you get to this article with this graphic on top, and it's already animating. So it doesn't really require a lot of work out of you. Like I think people are just lazy. Like we don't like to click on stuff. We don't like to hover. We just want to like use our fingers and like read stuff. Next. This is another one where like it has an entire interface at the top where you can scrub and like refresh, play, pause. But this one just shows usual median weekly incomes and the unemployment rate for different educational groups. So the basic message is if you don't have a college degree, you are not having a good time. You suffer more in the recession, and your wages have grown very, very slowly. So again, this is something that really like I made this interactive so I could make a GIF of it and put it on Twitter. But it's like this super it's like professionally made on the internet, but it's really just a GIF.
Yeah, so the top scale is a little hard to see on the screen up there, but it goes back to pretty much before the recession and then up to, looks like fourth quarter of 2016.
Yeah,
there.
so this is a connected scatter plot. So like you see that weird big dip at the bottom is the recession. So let's go to the next one. This is like right after the Gorsuch nomination. This is Martin Quinn scores, so how liberal or conservative each judge was. And this is just, I made a static graphic of this, and our managing editor was like, yo, can you animate it? And I was like, all right, let's make a GIF. This never made it on the website. We just put it on Twitter.
So Douglas goes way off on the left side, looks like over there. And
yeah, that guy, he is a little liberal, I think, yeah. Well, the big takeaway with it, what's interesting about this is that most justices become more liberal the older they get and the longer they stay. So even the most conservative ones swing to the left. So this is another interesting sort of, one thing we do is that we break the axes, we break convention. And in this case, like time goes up. Usually time goes left to right. We don't care, we just do whatever we want. The same thing with all the connected scatter plots, like the time is just the length of the line, but we're just connecting the dots by two different metrics. So like we care more, it's sort of like you care more about the story, like how are these things interrelated? And that's where the animation gives you time for free. So like, I don't need to label years. All right, next. Yeah, what? Oh, that was it's Martin Quinn. It's a data set that's out there. So what they do, I think they look at how frequently judges voted alongside each other, so like voting blocks. So if a group of justices always voted together, they're more alike. I don't know the particulars, but it's not something I created. It's an academic data set.
Maybe it's worth noting that in data journalism, we very rarely make our own data. We are almost always working with public data or data that official sources or academic sources have created. So we're interpreting a lot of the time. It takes a lot more time to create your own data and to work with the raw data. So we just don't have that kind of time or money.
Yeah. Or no, I mean, I don't know how to create a methodology to collect data and make sure it's valid and good. There are hundreds of, if not thousands of people and organizations out there that do nothing but that, but they don't do VIZ, and so we do.
You also see that as a problem?
What? Not necessarily. I mean, before I came to the Post, I did visuals at the Urban Institute, and they're a social and economic policy research institution. So very academic. One of the things that we tried to do as while I was there was to democratize the visualization of data. So things like this type of conference where you do skill shares, teach people and academics how to make better charts, how to simplify, how to figure out what your audience is, and then to design something for your audience. I think that's something that there's obviously room for improvement, but at the same time, I don't necessarily need those researchers at the Urban Institute to make pretty charts, because at the end of the day, I want their information, their data. I want them to talk to me on the phone and explain to me why, an increase in the corporate tax rate would affect people, and then let me walk me through my project and help me explain it to everybody else.
I mean, it would be crazy to expect journalists to be experts in absolutely every field that we write about. I mean, you may be writing about urban data one day, and then wages, and then railways, and then coal. I've written about water, I've written about stormwater. I've written about water and globalization. I mean, that's like you hit such a wide range of topics that, yeah, we do judge whether the data is from a reputable source, and we cultivate sources inside different fields. But journalism is about writing, it's about communicating, and you guys are the experts in your field. So it makes a lot more sense for the people who are experts in their field to be experts in their field, and then we talk to people who are recognized experts.
That's what I was getting at, was how do you ensure that you have, secure, good, reliable sources, and it's not fake news data.
Yeah.
So this is good. If you've got questions, why don't you go up to the, let's head up to the mic. This is great. So yeah, just go ahead. That way everybody can hear.
I do, but whatever. This is natural. Let's just go with this.
Bias and bias data set. When you put something together like that, do you ever go back to the person that constructed the data and say, hey, I'm putting this together?
Yeah.
Look, is it
Absolutely.
portrayed accurately? Am I missing something?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
And did you ever hear back from people that have put together the data and said, that's not right?
Yes.
yeah.
So talk about those experiences.
Sure. I mean, with that particular Martin Quinn example, that chart has been done by like 1 million people. So it's not even that same format of like time going up. Like the New York Times ran that in their front page like a pretty long time ago. So it's not like there's some cases where like if you're using a data set that's like pretty well traveled, like if I'm going to make a BLS a chart off BLS numbers of like how many jobs there are in the economy, I don't need to like call somebody to like talk to them about that. Like it's a pretty reputable data set. But for example, something we did like a week ago where we looked at SEC filings for healthcare companies and collected CEO pay data. That's something where like we collected hundreds and hundreds of numbers and verified them like 3 times. So I mean, it's just honest. It's just like shoe leather reporting. At some point, so you just do your due diligence.
And sourcing too. So I worked on a project that the infrastructure project kind of led me. There's a pipelines map in there. Led me to kind of want to explore that a little bit deeper. So I found an expert in the oil and gas industry who had lots of data for every oil or gas well that had ever been drilled in America. So we got that data. We ended up visualizing 4 million or so points, and we were, I interviewed him, talked to him. We were all good. I sent him the information, or I sent him, a draft of the graphic before it was going to run, and I said, hey, and I do this with almost every single one of my projects, unless it's very clear that the data set I'm using is solid. But I'll talk to my source. I'll say, hey, can you look at this? Make sure I'm not doing anything stupid here. And he got back to me and said, yeah, you're like totally missing all of Indiana. So we worked it out, but like, that way that's just part of being honest, and just as much as being honest,
Yeah.
I don't want to get dinged on Twitter or in the comment section of the page, like, oh, well, you guys totally forgot Indiana. Like, there's an oil well in my backyard. That's like, I don't want that, and it hurts not only my credibility, but the credibility of the publication too.
One thing that is that is useful to know about data journalism is that it is slower than other kinds of news. We do a lot of fact-checking, and it takes, I mean, contrary to popular belief, like we have this kind of idea that, oh, if we're doing something on the computer, it's faster, cheaper, and better, right? Like data journalism is not that. It's more expensive, it's slower, it's far more time consuming, and there are a lot more people involved than you think. Like there is nobody who does data analysis and graphics and mobile optimization and writing and editing. Like,
So maybe some of the people in this room here, I think, maybe find that in their job.
right, but in the newsroom, like there's nobody who does all of those things all at one time. Like we have a team, right? So we have a designer, we have a data analyst, we have a HTML jockey. Like we have a team, and we have really rigorous fact checking. Okay, I believe a lot in the fact-checking process inside journalism. Data journalists generally belong to professional organizations that have professional codes of ethics. All right, so there's that check inside the industry. And we do this slowly, and we double check our work to the best of our ability at every stage. And we also generally publish something called a nerd box, which is a methodology section. If the nerd box is not right next to the story, often data journalism teams will have a data team blog that they will publish the methodology on. So ProPublica does a great job of this. They have a nerds blog where they will go into great detail about how they did the analysis on a story. And so we do that for transparency because we want readers to understand what we're doing and how we arrived at our conclusions, because that helps to create trust between the reader and the journalist. So we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, one of the reasons I made that comment is we have a lot of the folks out here are kind of on the other side. They're the data sources, and they kind of wish they had people who could do a lot of that visualization for them and everything. So, but how do you approach when you have your data set, and you have your story? How do you kind of approach turning that into reality and into an effective visualization? So,
you just start playing with it. That's sort of if I find your data, I'm going to try to I'll make a histogram to figure out where the numbers live, and then I'll read about how it was collected, and then I'll read about how else it was used, and then I'll just try to squeeze out my own idea out of it. There's a reason it's a job. There's a reason that people have jobs who that is just data viz, because it's it's a weird art form thing. It's you just figure it out.
Well,
I don't have a good answer.
I mean, there is a fair amount of just figuring it out, but picking up the phone and talking to people is call somebody. These experts and you guys do this for a living. I could pick up that phone and call. I keep going back to the Urban Institute, but I could call a researcher there and say, hey, I see all this data. Here's what I think it means, but you tell me why I'm wrong to think that. And usually that's part of the story, and a very important part of the story. And it's by that first initial phone call or email or whatever kind of exchange that you can establish trust, and also make sure that I don't send it to them before I publish and have them say, no, this is completely wrong. Because hopefully I'm going in the right direction at the beginning, and the story arc is in the right kind of direction. And it's not misleading. It's not using bad numbers or numbers in a way that they're not supposed to be used.
Any of you work with Tableau? Raise your hand. Yeah. So I really like Tableau as a tool for kind of quick sketching of data. It's really easy to use, and so having a package that you're really familiar with and being able to put together a dozen different graphics really fast, and not make them professional looking. You kind of sketch with the data and you look at it a dozen different ways, and then you figure out what actually makes sense. You kind of put yourself into your audience's shoes and say, all right, what kind of story am I trying to tell? What kind of narrative am I trying to craft with this data, and what is the visual that fits with it?
We're doing on time here. Okay, we're doing good here, okay. If there's anybody who has any audience questions, you can feel free to come up and line up with the mic there. I've got a few here. I'll kind of be going along as you guys are thinking of other ones. So let's see here. So one of the things that, actually before I move on, did you want to talk any more about these?
I mean, there's more, but like
yeah.
I think it's gone elsewhere.
Okay, that's cool. We'll,
Let's let nature take its course.
all right, we'll just leave it up there. That's kind of a cool picture. But
Probably the next one. This was kind of ugly. So
that one?
there you go. That one moves.
Yay. Got bouncy balls there. But
Yes, that'll give us hours of entertainment.
perfect. All right. So one of the things that you're faced with when you're telling a narrative is deciding what to include and what to leave out. And so you want to minimize the information to tell the story clearly, but at the same time you want to provide enough to do proper context. And so how do you approach this as far as finding that happy medium in between showing too much but not enough to tell the whole story? So
I mean, the biggest pitfall there is that with certain data sets, if you leave out things, you're wrong. So there is a point where you got to be really careful about what you take out, and you have to be very clear with how you label things because you don't want to misrepresent the data. An easy way to sort of not do that is just because you can make interactive graphics, you can be smart about how you filter things. I mean, this one's a good example where we're showing you everything, but then you have these interfaces at the top that you can select certain industries. So I mean, I don't think you have to really leave anything out. You just have to sort of edit it in a smart way.
Yeah, along with that editing, I'll say, if I will talk to somebody and they'll say, everything's important. But if everything's important, then nothing's important.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about exactly as you said, establishing a hierarchy of information.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, margin of error is probably important. And we, especially in the news media, can do a much better job at indicating uncertainty.
Or never poll.
Or don't use polls, whatever. That kind of thing, whether you want to include the number of values that were included in the study, that kind of stuff makes for good footnotes. Maybe it doesn't need to be in the title. I see a lot of that in the academic world. But yeah, it's just careful editing and when in doubt, check with your people.
You have a question from the audience?
Yeah, my question's kind of along those lines. When you're taking data and visualizing it, and you're not exactly presenting all of it, you're kind of picking and choosing what you're presenting. It gives you a lot of power over the reader's opinion, forming the reader's opinion with the visualization you're showing. So how careful do you have to be when you're presenting data that you're not influencing someone too much in one direction or another direction, or I guess, can you talk about some of the concerns with that?
Well, with great power comes great responsibility.
I feel like I've heard that somewhere before.
Yeah, it's possible.
Abraham Lincoln, right? Yeah.
So how do we act responsibly as journalists, I think, is the question. I will go back to the idea of a code of ethics. There are professional codes of ethics, and as journalists, we're very aware of our professional responsibility and our obligation to the truth. So part of being, part of truth is calling bullshit, right? There is bad data out there. Data is ultimately socially constructed. Every data set has been compiled by people. People make mistakes. We have this idea that data is somehow more objective because it's numbers. I mean, it's not true. It's people counting things. So we have to kind of think about how is the data constructed, what is the story we're trying to tell, what is the truth, and how do we get there in a way that's fair and honorable.
So I mean, to answer the question of how do you sort of not mislead people, there's two parts of that. Some people are just on one side of the spectrum or the other, and there's nothing you can do. Like, they're just not going to have a good time. So I mean, if you actually hit the next one, this is a good example. So this is a map we made showing the percent of uninsured by county, right? So we published this, and then all the liberal people were like, oh my God, Obamacare's so good, right? And then, the conservative folks were like, what about, 2016? Why didn't you include that? And it's like, well, data lags a year behind. And then they were like, oh, I bet it's going to go up, the next year. So, this is something I think that you could objectively say that paints, the ACA in a somewhat positive light. But if you hit the next one, this paints it in a bad light, right? So one of the things we, at Axios, we have an equal number of people accusing us of being left-leaning than we have people accusing us to be right-leaning. And I think that's a pretty good place to be. Everybody hates us, which is great. So, I mean, I think a way to get around that is like, yeah, there are two sides to every story, right? And there are different ways of interpreting the data. And, we're all just trying to describe reality. That's all the data is trying to do. You just have to be honest and, how, what are the flaws of one idea or one interpretation versus the other.
So I guess if you can't see the, can't read the thing up there top there, but it's basically this graph is showing like the number of insurers in the marketplace is decreasing over the
Yes.
since the ACA was.
Even though this is already outdated because a lot of them have filled in. But yeah, this is a whole hot button topic.
Have another question?
Yes. I was curious, where do you guys look for inspiration? Where do you get ideas for new ways of visualizing data or, doing something out of the box? Do you look to your colleagues? Do you look to academia? And if you could also talk about like some of the maybe more out there places where you found inspiration for visualizations?
All of the above, really. The data visualization community on Twitter is very active. I'd say that's where most of it happens. Most of the conversation happens. Gregor Eich's comment or tweet earlier about I spend a huge part of my day making little GIFs of my work so that people will click on them is absolutely true. I spent all of yesterday making the shadow go across the earth on this map I did for the eclipse.
Full-time job.
Which, it takes a long time. But at the same time, there are also a major inspiration that I just found is, an old, like 1940s census book with maps. And, the way that they used to do maps with cross-hatching and, stippling and that kind of stuff is, very interesting to me. And I think that's something that I'll probably be using coming up here very soon. Also, USGS has an incredible cartography style guide that we dug into, and they have beautiful swatches of colors and across, again, more hatches, and everything is encoded in a visual kind of manner. So picking up those kind of cues and expanding on them. People like Laz, like Meredith, seeing what they're doing. Group that's way out there would be Bloomberg.
Oh, that's so fun.
Their
Not anymore, though.
Does some really crazy stuff. And who was it that just did the football thing?
John Boyce
John Boyce.
of SB Nation. It's like this weird postmodern, like, it's just so good.
Was that the thing about the brain injuries?
No, that's, this is not like, it's like a story. It's like this weird interactive journalism project about the future of football. It's insane. It bears no meaning to anything we're talking about here. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
And
Oh, there's that Hamilton one too. Remember the Wall Street Journal project about the lyrics of Hamilton, where they like broke down the lyrics and sourced it and compared it to clips of musical styles. So it's just like that was also a project that was just like crazy and all over the place and gorgeous.
So one note about like inspiration and where to look for ideas, like something interesting that's been happening on Twitter is that somebody made GG Joy, I think, which is an RStats package, where like now you can make every chart look like the Joy Division album cover, and it's just like I think like something like that came out like maybe a year ago. Like we did an election map like that, and it's like so played out. Like now everybody's doing it because it's part of like our studio, and it's like
you guys just did one last week.
Yeah, we did. I hate it. But it's just like the in thing now. So it's like, I kind of worry about that like everybody, it's like a herd, right? Like everybody discovers that there's a really cool way of making charts, so everybody does it that way. Like I try to like look at like old stuff. Like the Menard map is great because this guy just made it by candlelight like a million years ago. So like, you know, finding like old stuff and sort of like drawing inspiration from that is nice, to your point.
Yeah, I mean, going beyond the magpie mentality of like, oh, let's just use like the new hot
If everybody else is doing it, it's probably not what you should do. That's,
So conferences, there are lots of great visualization conferences. I go to the Tableau Tapestry conference pretty often. I go to computer science conferences that are about visualization. And there are a couple of newsletters that I really like. Scott Klein has been doing this periodic newsletter about really, really old data visualization. There was that thing that was going around recently about W.E.B. Du Bois and data visualization. It's out there on social if you want to find it. Tufte, of course, like, you know, sometimes like I just pull out my Tufte books and I'm like, all right, let me flip through and like look at some historical stuff and like get inspired.
So one thing about like Tufte and this whole like movement about like, and also just data in general, like there's this like, I think the Tufte mentality is like, let's take a very scientific approach to data visualization. And I really think things are coming like, everything's like a flat circle, right? So like, before Tufte, you had Nigel Holmes, right? Yep. Like he made like the line chart of diamond prices, where it was like a woman raising her leg, and it was the corniest thing ever. But like I remember that chart, like it is seared into my brain, and I think there's something.
It's actually Britney Spears' leg.
It probably was. I mean, I think there's something to be said about like, you know, having fun with the way you present things, and like there's no wrong way of doing things until somebody yells at you. Yeah. So.
Well, until
Connection.
it's wrong.
Yeah, until it's wrong. But
Yeah.
that chart was right.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. But also I think being inspired by art is really important. I think that the scientific approach, the purely scientific approach, like it had its moment. And you know, you do need to think about science. You need to think about statistical rigor. But then it's also really great to think about fine art influences and like, okay, like let's not make everything look like Joy Division, but like, hey, what could we pull from the past that might be really fascinating?
And to that point, I think audience is also important. Like, who are you making things for? If you're making things for other academics that understand, like, you know, margin of error and like all the statistic stuff, like, then yeah, you know, like, do your thing, right? But you know, I have to make stuff for people who don't want to look at charts. Like, that's a hard job. So like, I have to get up every day and convince them to like look at data. So I mean, you got to do whatever you have to do to make that work. So.
Have another question?
My question actually builds just on what you said. This is a room full of people that love this topic, and especially the Department of Transportation. Folks aren't just trying to convince external people of their use cases, but of our own colleagues as we're trying to present our cases just in a weekly or monthly meeting. As data-driven storytellers up here, can you please give this room advice on how to best do that from a ground-up approach? I think you just did a great job giving us inspiration on where to find visual ideas, but how do we start telling those stories on an incremental basis to start changing that culture within the Department of Transportation?
So my best advice is to go to a lot of parties. All right. So I am either really, really interesting or really, really boring at parties, depending on your perspective, because I always talk about what I'm working on. And I use talking about it at parties as a way of refining my pitch. And I will talk about what I'm working on, and I'll kind of watch the person's reaction. And I can tell when I'm getting boring, and I can tell when I'm getting really interesting. And I kind of use that to feed the way that I tell the story when it comes out in public. I also explain it to my friends and family a lot, explain it to my kid. Like, kids are really are terrific audiences because like they get bored really quickly. Like, my kid will listen to me because I'm his mother, but he also will not put up with a lot of nonsense. So that's how I know, all right, am I telling the story in a way that's going to capture somebody's interest and is going to influence them and make them feel something.
Yeah, I mean, getting people to understand why they should care, I think is, that's part of your, I explain things to my mother. You know, if my mother can understand something I'm working on, then I've done my job. She's my, you know, my target audience in a lot of ways. You know, I like to think of, you know, when I worked with Urban, I would do this thing. So you put your hands together, make a triangle, right? And you would have, you know, the depth of the research or whatever could be represented in bands that go across this triangle. So at the very bottom, you know, base of the pyramid, you would have, you know, very, you know, methodology-heavy reports with, you know, 35 to 90 pages worth of appendices and tables and things like that. A little bit higher up, maybe you get, you know, a little bit more forward-facing report that's got some images in it and some charts. A little bit higher than that, maybe there's a blog post that the researcher has written that explains why it's important. You know, maybe above that, or, you know, slightly below that is like congressional testimony or something like that. And all the way at the top is like the tweet. You know, this is why it's important. Now, if you take that same triangle and flip it over, that's the number of people that probably should be able to understand what the hell you're trying to explain. So your super deep methodological, you know, report that's got 1 million pages of tables and appendices, you know, might only be intended to be understood by a handful of people, but that's fine. But if you want it to reach 1 million people, then that's a disconnect that's not going to work. Mm-hmm. Whereas the tweet is not going to have nearly enough stuff in it to work for those super high rigorous academics.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, you know, it's sort of like just like a message discipline. Like, I think you should focus on saying one thing with your biz and just say it really well. Like, it's better to do one thing well than to do like 7 things okay. So that's like something that we sort of impose on our graphics. It's just like what is the interesting thing about it, and nothing more and nothing less, because it just gets weird.
That's not to say you can't have 3 interesting things in separate thoughts.
Yeah.
So what are some of the best examples of visualization that you've seen other people use in their context, and why do you think that?
Those joy division charts drive me crazy.
Oh, are we going to talk about data visualization that we hate? Because
Sure,
yeah.
go for it. Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. I mean, again, I spend a decent amount of time either commuting or whatever on Twitter, and it's just the visual posts, obviously, are the ones that catch my attention, as they do most normal people, which is why we have jobs. Mm-hmm. Just the number and amount of new visualizations that are out there is incredible. And even in the last couple of years, I've been doing this for like 10 years, and that's not even that long, but the new risks that people are taking, you know, things like that Meko chart that that Laz showed, that, you know, expanded on the x-axis as well as the y-axis to show that histogram. That's something that you don't see very often, but when you do see it and it makes sense to see it, like sometimes you see stuff and it's like, why the hell did they do that? Mm-hmm. But in some cases, like that one, it made perfect sense. That's like one of those like kind of moments to some people. And then you'll start to see that more and more and more until it's a thing, and then Laz will hate it.
Yeah, forever. But to me, what I like to spend a lot of time on Reddit, on the Data is Beautiful sub.
It's a great site.
Because the people who post charts there, they're not professionals for the most part. Like, there are a handful of professionals, and like they make really nice things, and like, okay, whatever. But like, I like seeing what like a regular citizen of America or the world, like how they approach data visualization. Like this sort of like how not like people who have all this like baggage about how we should make charts approach it. And I think that's sort of liberating. It's like, because you think that like, you know, you're in this environment and you say, I am a professional data human, and like you just kind of get stale. You gotta like get out of your sort of tower and try new stuff.
I would say that our stuff, like, so Laz and I both contribute to that. Doesn't always do nearly as well as some of the.
Yeah, like people like bar charts about rap is essentially the message that I get.
The vocabulary of rap songs.
It's like simple stuff. Not really simple, but you know.
So we have a lot of folks out here that do GIS and stuff, so I wanted to just pull this guy up here too. Just if you could talk a little bit about.
Oh yeah, so this is something that I tried to get you guys to do at the post,
We
and
did
then
it just 3 weeks ago. when
Did you?
Mosul fell, yeah.
I think I beat you to it.
You probably did.
Yeah. So this is IHS Markit. So it's a defense intelligence company, and they for a while had been keeping track of territory control in Syria and Iraq. And I knew the person who was giving us the maps because she always used to send it to us at the post, Amanda Russo, who left. Now we have to deal with Colomb.
Yep.
Great guy. So I emailed him and I was like, hey man, could I have everything? So usually a lot of the emails I send to analysts and experts, it's like, can you just give me your entire hard drive? And he did, which was awesome. And these came in as KMLs, which I just loaded into QGIS. I colored them and then I exported them out and I just animated with JavaScript. So this is a case of information that is of public interest. Like people want to know what's going on in Syria and Iraq and with the Islamic State, but it's in a format that not everybody can really open or understands. Like GIS is sort of like a black box for a lot of people, and it's also all over the place. So this information is all across files, and really the value of this is can I get a bird's eye view of this? This is the tip of the pyramid, right?
Yeah, sure.
This is that's it. You're seeing the whole graphic. There's nothing else. You have a date and a shape.
Yep. So we did the same thing, except focused only on the city of Mosul. And so Mosul just fell in early to mid-July, and the battle for Mosul had been going on since October 17th. So what we did is we used this same data, and we just zoomed in on Mosul. We used some satellite imagery. We used some other analysis data to look at building damage, that kind of stuff. And you can see, this battle progressing. Started in the east, and they kind of Allied forces kind of cleared out the east. They got to the rivers around January. They had the east of the river cut off on January, at the end of January. And then since then, it's been this battle for West Mosul, which is incredibly densely populated. We also had a population density layer in there as well. And we just explained using satellite imagery, this other data, why it was so hard, why this was a different type of war, and why it was tricky. So it's funny that this illustrates the difference between what I do at the Post and what Laz does at Axios very well.
Yeah, so one big takeaway that I try to keep in mind when I'm making stuff is that, what is really simple for me that is 10,000 feet into this world, what's really basic for me and what's common knowledge is gonna blow other people's minds. I remember once I was sitting with a reporter and I had QGIS open and I just changed a projection and she was like, whoa, you're just changing a projection in QGIS and people it blows their minds. So you gotta remember that you have a very narrow view of sort of what you're doing, and just sometimes zooming out and giving people a general overview sometimes is very useful.
On that point, I should say that I don't do mapping. I have such enormous respect for how intricate and complicated GIS analysis is that I have never learned to do it because it is hard and I do all these other things instead. So when I need to make a map, I go to somebody who really knows GIS because I'm just gonna do a crappy job of it. So it's, I want to bring that up because I really value the specialization that there is inside data visualization and inside data journalism. And like you guys were saying before, this is a full-time job. And so I have a lot of respect for the expertise that people develop inside their different verticals. And I want to support and encourage that.
Questions? Yes.
Since you named JavaScript, would you guys name some of the JavaScript libraries you use day to day?
D3 probably for everything under the sun. D3 is it's a paintbrush. You can just do whatever you want with it. But really, for like stuff like this is not fancy. This is like a bunch of images absolutely positioned on top of each other, and you can use like vanilla JavaScript for this. But D3 is really the biggest thing.
I use, so I actually don't code that much, but whenever I do, so my version of this thing was actually a GIF that I made. Just
Photoshop, probably.
Either
Yeah.
Photoshop or there are GIF makers where you can upload 37 images and,
Yeah.
and just like step them.
It's really not fancy. I screen cap my GIFs.
I was just going to
Yeah.
say, so this giant Eclipse project, if you search my name and then Eclipse, hopefully it comes up. Because we
How's your
wanted to.
SEO, Tim?
Yeah, hopefully it's good. It was built with 75 screenshots.
Yeah.
And just put together. We did a lot of GIS work with geoimagery and raster imagery that we toned and did a lot of cool and crazy stuff with, and used like hydrology and transportation files for road networks and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we brought all that stuff in as a raster image, and we took a bunch of screenshots.
Yeah.
And it's like, why? I mean, there are other ways to do this probably, but that was quick, easy, effective. It did suck when we had to go back and change something, but you know what?
Yeah, so like an interesting thing to take away from that is like if your job is to make a visualization at the end, it does not matter how you get there, right? Like every tool is fine. Like in a screen grab, if you have a retina display, is probably a really good tool. Like why do you have to worry about saving things? Just like screen grab. It's right there, it's free.
Just make sure you do it right the first time.
Yeah, or do it until you get it right.
Or do it right.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. So.
Yeah, kind of on the point that was a little bit earlier about learning new tools and how much effort at this point do you put into learning new visualization tools versus going to someone else? And related to the other point you just made, what percentage of the time are you just trying to hack in something you already
All
know
the time.
rather than going to
100%.
something
Literally
else?
every day of my life is just a big hatchet job, pretty much. Yeah, that's the short answer.
Yeah, the new tools are, I'd say, I don't know, an hour or so a day at least. I get into the
Really?
office at like 7:30 in the morning, and at that point, it's I'm either making a map of something that's been blown up in Afghanistan, or I'm browsing Twitter or whatever, and kind of using that map to explore. One of the things that I want to really get into is everybody knows about DEM files, elevation files, right? I'd love to be able to get those elevation files and then also link those up either in a 3D program or eventually to get to augmented reality so that you can have your cell phone. Do you guys know what augmented reality is? Imagine you have your cell phone and you have this table right here, and you look through your cell phone, basically using your camera at this app, and on this table, it detects the plane, and it will eventually, it would have a three-dimensional model of a mountaintop removal mine in West Virginia or something. And all of our graphics that we do, where we will point to things or whatever, could be done the same way in 3 dimensions. So a lot of times we'll spin things around in 3D or whatever in a graphic, only because you can't physically walk around it. I think that's an area that could be kind of cool, and it's something that I'm slowly chipping away and learning how to do. But to be able to come out and do a project tomorrow, I wouldn't be able to do it.
I mean, are you trying to learn it if there's not someone else around you who knows, or would you?
Oh, there are.
Go and ask people to?
And there are. So there are specialists that do at the Post who are working on new story forms all the time. But they're working on design in augmented reality, but not necessarily information graphics. So it's, this was a great thing that Laz did when he was there. It was working with people who don't always work together, and linking up that coder who specializes in iOS development for the iPhone, and somebody who's very highly visual, and putting them in a room together and figuring something out.
So we are right at 11 o'clock here, and I know we've got one more breakout sessions coming, so I want to get those folks who are setting up for that time to do that. But we really appreciate Tim and Meredith and Laz for being with us this morning. This was a fabulous conversation, and I've got their contact information up there on the board. And If anybody has any other questions, I'm assuming we can stay up here for a few more minutes afterwards if you want to come up and talk to us one-on-one. And certainly appreciate everybody's time, and we'll see you later.